Tim,
Hey
20,000
there.
subscribers. 20,000. That's
Woohoo!
crazy. How long did it take you to get there?
I've had a very strange road because you kind of saw my channel fairly early on
I
when
did.
not a lot of people had found it,
Down
and
to
you had me
1,000
come onto your
subscribers or so.
yeah you had me come onto your channel and talk about my book.
That's right.
But that year, 2020, when COVID hit and there was just a lot of news that people were really, very had strong feelings and reactions to on
Right.
different sides of the aisle. And so the big one that I was really talking about was churches and whether they should open or not, and how different
That's
churches were
right.
dealing with that. Specifically, John MacArthur's church, but there were other churches too that opened and
Yeah, yeah.
felt that they should continue to meet on Sundays as an entire church. James
Yep,
Coates,
yep.
he
That's right.
ended
Up
up,
here in Canada, yeah.
yeah. And so yeah, that really caused my channel to kind of explode during that window of time.
Hmm.
Um, but it's kind of exciting and humbling because I mean I didn't do a good job of building off of that, and
Sure.
honestly that stuff was a little outside of what I ever envisioned doing on my channel, and so as a
Right.
result it kind of created one of those things where I had like a mixed audience.
Hmm.
But
That's right.
there were people that found my channel because of that stuff and ended up sticking around because they do like my approach and what I talk about.
Yeah.
And so that grew quickly in 2020, and then it kind of just was a lot slower growth since then, and just kind of and also kind of really building that audience that really knows what my channel focuses on and really resonates with that. And
That's
so I
right.
would
That's
say,
right.
yeah, it's taken about really four. Well, I mean, I actually started in 2018, so now it's been 5 years really
Oh, wow.
altogether that I've
Wow.
been doing my channel.
That's impressive. I mean, it's quite the it's the marathon, right? It's not necessarily about, getting a video and getting a hit, and it does really well, and then that can happen. But the reality is making YouTube content, it's more of a marathon than it is anything else. It, if you grow slowly, it tends to be a little bit more stable as opposed to getting a big hit and then you watch the numbers go down the next day. But but that's
Hmm.
I mean that's just YouTube and the algorithm and how everything functions, which is
Yeah.
actually an interesting conversation all on its own, is how the YouTube algorithm functions and does it impact us as creators and how we make content. I would like to think that I'm totally what's the term, immune to that kind of
Hmm.
direction, but it certainly does impact the way you make your thumbnails. It impacts the way you order your content in the video and all that kind of stuff. But
Mm,
that's the tricky part,
absolutely.
is to remain yourself and not totally give yourself over to the algorithm. If you know what I mean. It's one of those things I think about rather frequently.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put a question that came in here.
Sure.
Logan said, anyone can answer this. If I were to start a review channel, what softwares should I use just in y'all's opinion? And people in the audience can also, chat there and give some of their opinions. I use DaVinci Resolve. They have a free version, kind of their starter version, but it still has really good features as far as editing videos. But Dwayne, you're like an IT guy, so
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Yeah. Before I was
you
a pastor, I was software developer. So I mentioned that
yeah.
in my last
So
video.
I don't know. You may actually sometimes people that are actually really good with computers are bad to ask because they can work with anything.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can Jimmy rig up a few things.
Uh,
The jank is
and they do,
strong with
yeah.
this one.
You can use stuff that's less user friendly than the average person.
That's right. That's right. No, but I use DaVinci. Before DaVinci, I was using Filmora. But I found that when I was doing the interviews, they were longer videos, right? So the editing, you would have 2 hours of content in the timeline, and Filmora just couldn't handle it. So I actually had to give that up for something else, and DaVinci has been working out really well. So that's all I use for all the editing and everything I do. And then I record separately in Audacity, and I do some edits and stuff to the audio, and then I port it all in separately.
Well,
But
your
like even
stuff.
my setup here, right? I got this computer's actually running the live stream that I'm viewing you on, and all the comments, and then I have my camera in behind it with my microphone connected into the PC. So I'm actually surprised that you don't notice any lag between the audio and the video.
Yeah, it looks great and sounds good. I hear a little bit of clicking. I don't know if the audience is hearing any kind of a almost like a digital type clicking, but I could be wrong on that. It may not have anything to do with your setup.
I had to double check there because I'm actually in the laundry room, so on the other that way it's laundry, and there was
Yeah.
some laundry running. I totally forgot to make sure it wasn't running, but it's not running, so we're good.
Yeah, and I know you may have to leave momentarily at times because the kids are around there somewhere, and I know
That's
that
right.
how
They're
that
they're
is,
upstairs. They're
right?
right above me.
Yeah. So
Right
we'll
now
we'll
they're
we'll.
playing Goat Simulator, and so that will work for an hour. So
Well, I want to let the audience know that Dwayne, my guest here, is a pastor up in Canada, and in a second he can tell us the specific town. But his channel, Dwayne Green's channel, if you haven't seen it, he covers a lot of textual, New Testament textual criticism type issues and which text basis of the New Testament we should be using as Christians. Gets into theological things, and so he's my second guest today. I'm going to try to go 5.5 or 6 hours. He's going to get me through hopefully the second hour here,
that's
and
right.
we're going to talk about textual criticism, some different Bible translations, and also he mentioned as an idea talking about the mark of the beast, which I mean, hey, why not, right? Let's
That's
talk.
right. That's right. Let's do it.
Certainly an intriguing issue,
Yeah.
if not controversial. But that'll be a good topic during this hour. And next hour and a half or so, I plan to have Nicholas from Bible Verse Review. He's actually been chiming in. He's a marathoner too. I can
Nice.
tell. He's already been on with us for a while, and he's going to come on with me next hour. And that's when I'm going to announce my Bible giveaway Bible for this week, and the winner will be announced next week. But next hour, I'll talk about that. And then the fourth hour or fourth and a half hour or so will be Joe Castillo, pastor out in the Seattle area. So it's going to be interesting to
Okay.
get. I'm covering all different locations. Nicholas is in Northern Ireland, Europe, and Canada, and we just talked to Tim Nichols, who right now is in Washington, D.C. So we're going all over the place. And finally, we'll have Jason Whitaker from the channel Dear Woke Christian, who is he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, that area. So we're going
Nice.
all over the place.
Good.
All right. So before we get to the mark of the beast, talking about that very simple, straightforward issue.
That's right. Very
I
simple.
can't
Very
wait to
simple.
watch the live chat just
That's right.
light
It's
up
gonna
when
go
we talk
nuts.
about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about. Actually, this is cool. I had someone reach out to me, a editor for a Bible translation that we've talked about a little bit, actually. And I
Okay.
told you that uh, one of my barriers, I guess, to talking about the translation is I tried to reach out to the publisher and I never really heard anything back, and it made me feel like they weren't giving a lot of attention to their translation, like
Okay.
publishing it, new editions, and um, you know, continuing to just give attention to it. It's the
Oh, okay.
modern
Okay.
the
Yeah.
modern English version, and uh, I think his name is Jim or James Lindsay.
James Lindsay. Yeah.
He he had a review copy sent to me
Oh, very
of
cool.
the personal size large print, and he said he would really love for me to review it and talk about the translation on my channel. So that is going to be coming. I am going to talk about this Bible translation and my thoughts on it. Not too much detail today, but we can talk about
Yeah,
it
yeah.
a little bit here.
Yeah, if I'm not
It is
mistaken, I think they're coming out with a second edition shortly.
exactly, yeah. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, I
part
know.
of they're kind of like a smaller operation, or obviously they're new, but they're not one of the main publishers out there like
No,
Lifeway
no.
or Zondervan and Nelson, and all of those publishers are incredibly experienced, right? I mean, they've been producing Bibles for hundreds of years, some of them, and then their translations, they just had a lot of money backing them and a lot of
Right.
personnel and even like people that are well known endorsing their translations. However, this translation when it came out they got some really good endorsements, and
Yep,
they did some really smart things, and so they do have a following.
they do. Yeah,
And
they have a
we'll
pretty
we'll
devout
talk
following
about
too.
yeah, we'll talk about what
Yeah.
kind of I think draws people the most, but I do think that their editions they printed were pretty good, but they're pretty limited in terms of what they're offering. That
Yes.
being said, they kind of had, I think, an issue with printing more of the first edition than they were able to sell quickly. And so
Right.
it's taken time. At least this was my understanding. It's taking time for them to kind of get a lower stock of their first printing and then go on to the second printing. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I think so, potentially. I know there have been a number of complaints. I don't want to say complaints. That's not really the right word for it. But some have observed that there's been some, printing errors and such in the first edition. I think the second edition is going to look to remedy some of that. But the second edition, it's been kind of talked about for a long time. In fact, I think when I was looking at it a little while ago, there was a video back like 5 or 6 years ago talking about how there's the second edition and everybody's like expecting the second edition to come out, but it hasn't yet. But as I understand it, I think there's kind of like a new fervor in getting that second edition out. So time will tell. Time will tell, and we'll see.
Yeah,
But
so this
of,
is a
of
first
course,
edition. And what is it that people are drawn to with this translation?
if I had to guess, it would be because it's basically a modern English translation of the Textus Receptus, right? That's its selling point, in my opinion. It's a
You
TR
are the
based
perfect guy to
translation.
talk about this with.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a TR based translation, and in my own kind of perusing through it, I'm not comfortable yet to give like a final final recommendation or whatever with it just yet. But in my perusing, it seems to be more it's formal with a few little dynamic stuff in there, but yeah, it speaks to those who find the King James Version hard to read and who may even struggle with the New King James Version. They probably find a home if you're a Textus Receptus person in the MEV. But with that being said, that's the trouble with the MEV is it's got it its competition is the King James Version and the New King James Version, right? So that's going to be a hard market to break into, and maybe that's part of the initial jump in there with all the printings they did, as you suggested earlier.
Hmm. So on this topic of the Textus Receptus, for people who don't know, the King James version was based on Greek manuscripts that were compiled in the 1500s, and the King James was printed in 1611 when it was first printed, and so that textual basis has come to be known as the Textus Receptus,
Yeah.
the received text. There's a lot of history there, which it takes time to learn and talk about. But basically, it's 1500 scholarship that was the basis of the King James Version New Testament. Since then, we've discovered other manuscripts, and we've continued to study the ancient texts. And so this is going to be more like the King James based on that textual
Yeah.
basis. Uh, but the newer Bibles, the newer translations, typically are basing the New Testament on textual criticism that arises out of scholarship in more recent years. And it's really even a different philosophy, a different approach to how you look at the
Yeah.
manuscripts. So you've got the Textus Receptus, which is one category. You have the critical text, which is what I was just talking about. But then you
Yeah.
also have something called the majority text.
Hmm.
So what is that?
Yeah. I have a little bit of a gripe with the term majority text.
Okay.
No,
But people use it,
I
right?
yes, yes, they do. So majority text has come to mean basically a text that is somewhere between the TR and the critical text. But the term itself is a little bit misleading, right? And the reason is because when we think of majority text, we think of someone grabbing all the manuscripts, comparing all the readings, and then the reading which has most of the manuscripts would be added into the base text, would be added into the New Testament, and that would be considered the reading. But the I guess the struggle with this, right, is there's a number of places where the majority isn't so clear. And to give you an example, up here in Canada, we have an interesting political system, right? So it's a party-based system, and we have three main parties, and there's a couple offshoots. And what happens is at voting time, everybody will cast their votes, and then the party who gets the most seats, which is kind of like the electoral college in the states, ends up winning. Now the issue with is because there's like 3 to 5 parties, the party which wins the Canadian electorate and the one who becomes the prime minister doesn't get a majority of the votes. In fact, very rarely does it exceed 40% of the vote. So 30 to 35% is typically what a winning prime minister would get in the vote. And as you and I both know, 30 to 35 isn't a percent, or sorry, isn't a majority.
A majority.
So what do you do? How do you calculate that? Do you take the plurality? But what if they're similar? What if it's like 34% and 33% and 31%, right? I know it's my math. No, 33, 33, 33, 34. Like, what do you do there? It's split pretty evenly. You can take the 34, but it's so close, right?
Mm.
So in a majority text position, you still need to do some work to sort this stuff out. So it really isn't a true majority. So I prefer the term Byzantine text just because it's more a reflection of what we see um, in the majority of manuscripts. So you take the majority of manuscripts, you do a bit of work, and then you come out with something. And so the emphasis on that is rather than relying on the oldest manuscripts and the relatively few of those we have, which is typically what the critical text does, they see the oldest as better. Majority or Byzantine position would see the vast majority of later manuscripts as containing a better reading, and
Hmm.
that's the gist of the argument in
Would
my
would
my
you
opinion.
would you distinguish between the would you distinguish between the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text as you're defining it?
Yes, yeah, I would. I actually came under a little bit of fire in one of my videos. I suggested that the TR should be considered a majority text, and for the most part, it matches more closely with the majority or Byzantine text than the critical text. But I think historically, it does have its own like stream of transmission, and even a little bit of Latin influence in that. I know we often see the TR as a Greek thing, but there's definitely some Latin intrusion into it for sure. So
Hmm.
yeah, I would certainly keep the TR separate and see that as a separate instance of the majority text,
So
or not a separate instance of the majority. I would see it separate from the majority text. I gotta get my wording right here.
yeah, so even though the majority text is not your preferred title or terminology for how you look at those manuscripts,
Hmm.
would you say that if a Bible was printed and it was the majority text, the majority standard version for
Yep.
example, that, might be printed eventually. Would that actually be the text you personally would say is the best?
I think down to the nitty gritty little readings and stuff, I would say that the majority text is better.
Hmm.
As far as its impact on how we actually use it and the practicality of preaching from it, again, we come to the point where most people will say things like, well, there's hardly any difference between them and it doesn't impact doctrine and that kind of stuff. And that's true. That's true to an extent, absolutely. The main themes of the Bible are not impacted really when we talk about the distinctions between the critical text and the Textus Receptus. But
Hmm.
then when we move into the distinctions between the majority text and the Textus Receptus, well, I mean they're almost identical. I have here at Textus Receptus. This one's really interesting. Maybe we talk about it a little bit. But anyway, Textus Receptus is relatively new, printed by Grange Press. And I went through and I found all the differences in the book of Galatians. Um, Actually, I didn't really find them myself. I found a document that Maurice Robinson had actually collated and went and compared all the readings in Galatians. And there were only six differences, six, between the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text form. Just six.
Hmm.
And those six differences were like, they were nothing. They were nothing. Like one example here, I don't even know if I highlighted it. It was such a small difference, but it was one having to do with orthographics, how it sounds. So you know how we put an N at the end of the letter A when the next word has a vowel? So I would say an apple instead of a apple. Just
Hmm.
just makes it flow a little better, makes it flow a little nicer. That was
Sure.
one of the differences that I found in the book of Galatians. It was
Yeah.
Allah versus al with apostrophe next
Mm.
word. So I mean, they're between the majority and the Textus Receptus, they're essentially the same, essentially, and you'll find a few differences in Acts 8:37. I think is one that I got to look into, but
I'm gonna
it's
I'm gonna share something I shared, I think, last week too, and I just learned about this. It's Mark Ward worked on it with a team of people,
oh yeah,
and it's
the King
called
James Online
yeah,
Bible
King James Parallel
Parallel.
Bible. Let me see if I pull it up here. Please let us know in the comments if you can still hear us. Um, Hopefully you can still hear me now. Please let me know in the comments if there's any issue with hearing us. But can you see this, Dwayne, by any
Yeah,
chance?
I can. I got it. I see it.
Okay, and what I wanted to quickly show, Matthew 5 here, I just happened to pull this chapter up, is that this is showing anything that would be different between, on the left is the Textus Receptus, on the right is the critical text. And this kind of shows you, that this chapter here is really similar, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And there are going to be some difference. Here's, they have without a cause. Now this is
yeah.
what I meant by difference in approach, because the question on the left would be the Textus Receptus. Is it more likely that someone put in this phrase to clarify, or is it more likely that someone took it out for some reason, or by mistake took it
Right,
out, right? So I think
right.
that's kind of what the crux of the issue is. And
And that's difficult to determine without being able to, read the mind of a scribe, right?
yeah,
So
so I'll be honest with you. Over the years, I've kind of come to more of an agnostic view, because I think,
mhm.
we're talking about things that we can't, we're conjecturing as to
Right,
which way
right.
it could go. And I find that a lot of these arguments are tainted by, which you can't help, but we're human. So
Yeah.
if you went to a university where they taught critical text, and that you looked up to these scholars and they were telling you this is the right way to do textual criticism, of course you're more likely to think,
Right.
wow, that's really impressive and that's the right way to do it. On the other hand, here I'm a skeptical person,
Yeah.
analytical. I see a lot of TR people, and a lot of them have come from that background, and they want the TR to be correct. And so I
Right,
feel like
right.
there can be bias. So that example I just gave, in my opinion, this is just very personal.
Yeah.
It seems to me in that instance, it does seem more likely someone would add that in to
Hmm.
to clarify
Right,
rather
right.
than take it out. Now, does that mean all of the critical text is better? No, because I think there might be instances where the majority text, I know we don't want to call it that, but Byzantine
Well, I'm
readings
I'm
might,
starting to kind of succumb to the idea of calling it
sure,
the majority text. I don't
but
think I'm going to change minds.
Byzantine readings
It's
may
okay.
be more legitimate
Yeah,
when on the whole when you look at the evidence. And so I'm hoping over time that this stuff is going to converge. It can take a long time for that to happen, but I actually have
sure.
heard some critical text people come around a little bit more to like having greater and greater respect for other textual families. And
Oh
I think
yeah,
some
like
of the TR people are starting to go, you know what, maybe TR is a little bit too far, taking some of these
mhm,
arguments too far based on the King James, and we
right.
need to be more careful in our study. And that's where I think the Byzantine text view is a little more balanced. And
Yeah.
so hopefully we can come to better consensus over time.
Well, it's rather interesting, right? When you take a look at the ECM. So, for those who don't know, the ECM is the Critica Maior, and it's sort of the latest go around of attempting to apply textual criticism and come out with a New Testament that's closer to the original. So, the ECM, it had actually backtracked about 36 readings and have selected the Byzantine reading versus the Alexandrian reading.
Hmm.
I say Alexandrian reading, but the ECM doesn't make that distinction. But it 36 more readings they've shifted over to a more Byzantine type. So there does seem to be a bit more pull on that side. Do you guys
We
think
got
the
this
ECM
question
will
here.
change the conversation?
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. If I'm not mistaken, I think the ECM is using that kind of newer method of CBGM. I say it's newer, but I think it was like developed back in the 70s and then just kind of recently came to a little bit more of a useful state with computer technology and such. I don't understand fully how it works. I had a guest come on to share and explain how CBGM works, coherence based genealogical method. Makes me sound really smart, but it's a way of using computers to validate readings against each other and then categorize them and return to them. It's very complex. I don't fully understand it, but yeah,
Okay.
with that in play in the ECM, I think that will definitely change the conversation. And as I said, I mean, there's already 36 readings in the Gospel of Mark that have shifted out of the old paradigm into a more Byzantine reading. So
Hmm.
yeah,
All right.
but we'll have to mortgage our house to buy it though because it's very expensive. Each volume comes out; they're very, very, very expensive.
Well, yeah, that kind of brings up a whole other topic of money and all of that, and
Well, yeah.
you know
ECM's pretty niche though, right? Like you're not gonna sell that to the masses, and so economies of scale don't work.
that's true. That's
Yeah,
that's true. On the other hand, the King James Parallel Bible is free
that's
online.
right. Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think people should get compensated for their work,
Oh, absolutely.
but there can be a balance.
Sure.
So anyway, I mean it's a whole other topic, but I think the point is when it comes to textual issues, the conversation has been around a long time,
Yes.
and um, it does get shaped by historical factors. And what happens is at moments in time you can look at the conversation one way and kind of
Yeah.
see, but when you take a step back and you look at the overall trajectory and how things are coming, you can see conversations do shift over time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think critical text in the 1800s was kind of almost a overcorrection, like a course correction
Yes. Yeah.
over like
Yeah.
this, like just this knee-jerk defense of the King James, where you're not even allowed to question whether the King James translators were using the correct text in every case.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now that the critical text has allowed for that questioning, you have a lot of believing Christians. I mean, they believe the Bible, they believe it's inspired.
Yeah.
And so I think we're the conversation is getting to be a lot more fair-minded and balanced and reasonable.
Yeah, and what happened, right? It was the discovery of Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus by Tischendorf. And so when those came out, a bunch of people like jumped on the bandwagon because these are like the oldest complete Bible, mostly complete Bibles that we currently have, and that's setting aside the discussion of Sinaiticus being a forgery. I don't think that's the case, but there are others who think that. But either way, when these two manuscripts came out, Westcott and Hort, we all know the names. We've heard them before. That whether we see them in a bad light or a good light, but they jumped on these two manuscripts and did their comparative work and all their scholarly research and stuff, and were convinced that these two manuscripts were our best representations of what they called the neutral text. And so they brought this into their own research, and when they produced their own Greek New Testament, which became essentially the father of modern textual critical work, they relied heavily on those two manuscripts. Now, as I understand it today, modern textual criticism doesn't rely as much on Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and there's a wider array of manuscript evidence that they look at. But that's where it started, right? And that's where that's the overcorrection that happened there, and then coming back through the ages, we see that we're starting to go, okay, well, maybe the total reliance on Vaticanus and Sinaiticus wasn't such a great idea. And so we see things kind of changing
Unfortunately,
with each edition.
unfortunately, I feel like this happens in history in all different places, and it happens in the
Sure.
church in different with different issues. But what happens is whatever the status quo is often it's the default position, and it's also people are very protective of it. It's human nature, I
Sure.
think, to protect what we have in many
Yep.
ways. On the other hand, there are people out there, and there's always going to be this trend in humans to want change, and
Hmm.
that's part of life too, right? Like we always want to make improvements, we always want to discover new things and refine our understanding. And so when it comes to the textual issues, it's tricky. Uh, you can understand why people were so defensive of anything that would call into question the Bible they were used to. But here's my point. As humans, have you ever sung a song as a child and then heard someone sing it with different words when you were like older?
Yeah.
And your brain always says they don't sing it the right way
Right.
because whatever you knew is what's right. And so one frustrating thing to me is I get this all the time on my channel. People will say they took verses out. And you may from your position actually agree with that, but I think a lot of people when they say that, they don't
Hmm.
even really understand the issues. They
Right.
are
Right.
just saying, I know when I read the Bible, before it had
That's
this
right.
verse and
It
this
had
Bible
Acts
doesn't have it.
8:37. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's some of the stuff that we're dealing with is people like what they know and they prefer what they know.
Yeah.
And that's not all bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it adds a lot of tension, almost sometimes unnecessary tension to the conversation.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I mean, I'm of the position that yeah, they probably took some out.
Yeah.
I don't think they took them all out, right? They definitely took some out. I think there's some passages in there. They're very, very, very little support, but many of the others, right? They have the majority. They have it's in the Byzantine text and all that kind of stuff. So I would typically go that route. But yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, and I think that's why it's important not to be so dogmatic about it. And as much as we have our
Mm.
preferences, and my channel is based on talking about textual critical issues with a Byzantine bent, right? But this isn't an essential to the faith in the sense that my salvation doesn't rest on my choice of Bible translation. My salvation doesn't rest on my choice of Greek New Testament. I don't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament, right? That's where my channel is, New Testament textual criticism. But you know, my salvation doesn't depend on whether I'm reading from the Septuagint or the Ben Chaim text. Uh, you know, and I still don't or haven't really come across a textual variant that makes a difference to specific doctrines. Now, we can talk about Mark 16:9 through 20, and it's, you know, if it was circulating in the first century and it didn't have the long ending, then I would see an issue there. But we have the long ending in in all of our texts, and even some who have, you know, put the double brackets and say maybe this isn't scripture, and there's a big discussion about that. It does make it in our Bibles. It is in all of our
Sure.
translations. Like, we do have it. It's not going anywhere. Um, but even if that were removed, and I don't want to be the one to say let's remove text from the Bible, even if it were, though, you know, there's three other accounts of the resurrection of Jesus, and nothing hinges on that. And when we talk about snakes and scorpions and all that, we see that earlier, right? We see that in other passages of the Bible. We have Paul with the snake and axe, and Jesus telling us that we'll tread on scorpions, and so on and so forth. So that's probably the biggest one, that and the woman caught in adultery. But what truth is that giving us that is not found elsewhere in the scripture? Mm-hmm. So now I do want to caution, though, by me saying that doesn't mean that I don't think that it's important and that we ought to, you know, keep those in the scriptures. But I mean, we have to have grace with one another, especially in these conversations, because I've heard life-changing sermons from other viewpoints of the scriptures. So
yes, and one of the questions that's coming to my mind as you're talking about this is because a lot of people were brought up in maybe a very strict point of view, their faith almost rests in having a Bible that they can say, I don't have any doubts as to any single word that is you know, the basis for this translation. And the idea for some people of any doubt in any place, like the long ending of Mark, almost causes their whole framework to crumble. So my question for you is there anything that has been helpful to you, or a perspective that you have that kind of is your position when it comes to how do I know that I can still, I don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and I can know there are certain verses that maybe there's a question mark there as to the exact wording, or whether it was in all the manuscripts, and I can still have confidence that this is the Word of God and that He has preserved it.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'm a Byzantine guy, right? Like, I just think that the Byzantine has it, and for me that affords enough stability on the text to say that, yeah, God preserved His word. And I know my channel often will appeal to those who are kind of stuck between positions, right? They're not critical text people, but they're not quite TEXTUS RECEPTUS guys. And you know, these are the people who typically come and watch my content. And I think because I went through the same struggle, right? Like that's part of what birthed the channel and birthed the discussion and learning Greek, is that, you know, how do I find like certainty in the Word of God? But I ran through, not ran through, but I ran across this teaching from Brian Ross. Actually, he's a King James onlyist, but he's been very, very friendly and cordial, and he does a lot of research, very thorough. One of the most thorough guys that I've run into.
Was he the guy that did a debate recently?
No. That's Thomas Ross. But Brian Ross.
These guys need to get different last names. It's too confusing.
Yeah, well, you guys need to get different first names, Tim, and Tim. But he put together very well thought out, thorough idea on what he calls verbatim identicality and content equivalence. So when we come across some, now he wouldn't apply it in the same way that I would. He applies it to King James and the TR. But I look at the Byzantine text and I see words that are essentially the same. The words themselves are slightly different, but the final meaning that comes out when you take it all in, it's the same. It's content equivalent. So we don't have to worry about being verbatim identicality or being verbatim identical in that, every single word has to match and God preserved every jot and tittle. I think that's a misinterpretation of Matthew
Mm.
5:18, but
Mhm.
um, but yeah, the idea that there can be some variance in the words that we see, but the meaning that comes out of the context and the meaning that comes out of everything is identical, and that's where
Yeah.
you get what is it? What I just said it. It's the words. It's too fancy. It's too fancy. But yeah, I do recommend his content. He's got really good
Mm.
stuff. He's a King James version onlyist guy,
Mhm.
but he's really awesome in how thorough he is with his ideas. So certainly check
Mhm.
him out. But that I found that
Yeah,
helpful.
I think it's really important to have a theology that understands the realities that even if it's helpful to people, you don't
Yeah.
want to build your foundation on something that can crumble easily and most importantly isn't what God actually said. So a lot of our
Right.
arguments, they're not actually what God himself said. There's no verse in the Bible
Right.
that tells you to use the King James.
Right. Right.
Right?
And
Because it
well, and
wasn't even there yet. But let's
even when
take
you
the New
yeah,
Testament. The
yeah,
New Testament, the apostles were basing their understanding of scripture on texts that they had in their day.
right.
And, a lot of these things weren't as cut and dry from a historical perspective as we wish they would be. In other words, it takes
Right.
time. But I
Yeah.
personally believe we have more evidence, for what the New Testament says than so many other ancient
Oh, sure.
books. And yet those books, we don't doubt Homer, we don't doubt
No, 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 no.
Shakespeare, we don't doubt all these other ancient writers, right?
Yeah, on a very on a macro level, like there's no question. There's no
Yeah.
question that the Bible is referring to events that happened. Zero question.
Yeah.
Nobody's questioning that except for those who are have a chip on their shoulder.
So the mark of the beast.
All right, Mark of the Beast. This was fun. So I'm gonna throw. Can I throw some
Is this a
shade?
textual issue, by the way?
Yes, yes, it is. It is a textual issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna throw some shade. Can I throw some shade on someone?
As long as it's
Yeah.
not me.
Okay, okay. Dan Wallace. Yeah, I'm gonna throw a little bit of shade. I love Dan Wallace. Okay, he's
Someone
got some
mentioned
good
him in
stuff. But
in the
yeah,
comments a little
yeah.
earlier. Yeah.
I there it is. I think Dan Wallace said something to the effect of us having a Bible verse review. Oh, there is. If the KJV was good enough for apostle. Ah.
Yeah,
um,
I'm not sure what he was responding to when he said Dan
yeah,
Wallace.
I'm pretty sure it was responding to the idea of like um, how they essentially say this have the same message.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so Mark of the Beast. So Dan Wallace. I remember a couple years ago he went and he looked at, I think it was Papyrus 115, just a little scrap. I did a video on it. Um, and he suggested that maybe the mark of the beast is not 666, but the mark of the beast is 616. I
Just as you said
remember,
that, your video cut out. So
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's a sign, Dwayne.
that's funny. That's funny. Doesn't like the number 666 or 616. But yeah, he suggested that possibly, maybe we've got it all wrong, and it's 66. So I went and I did a little bit of research and tried to see things out, and what I discovered was that the reading for 666 is so well established in the like history of the New Testament textual transmission, that it actually surprised me a little bit that Dan Wallace kind of gave the impression that this could be a thing. So
Hmm.
the CSB has a footnote there, and the CSB says that it's a couple other Greek manuscripts say 616. And when you look into it, there really was only two Greek manuscripts that have 616. One was P115, and that was interesting because it doesn't just say 616, but it has a really weird way of translating it there. And so the
Hmm.
one who sort of deciphered it conjectured that it could be that the manuscript could read 666 or 616. I like that phrase like that because there's a little area in the manuscript which is not, it's damaged, and so you can't see what's there. But the word before 616 is the word or. And so no manuscript that we know of in Revelation reads or before 616. And so the conjecture is that it's probably going to be 666 and 616. So the scribe put both the readings in there because maybe he wasn't certain. But then you look at the early church fathers, and Irenaeus was rather outspoken against those who would suggest 616. I think he even suggested that they might be potentially going against the passage in Revelation 22, 18, and 19 and damning their souls, right, for using 616. And then everything up from Irenaeus out into the future, most of the church fathers at that point use 666 in all of their writings. Now, the interesting thing was who was it? Tychonius, a 4th century church father, North Africa. He was a Donatist. And he kind of promulgated the reading 616 through his commentaries, which went all the way up through and made it into some more commentaries in the 800s. Some of these made it to Ireland, potentially. There's some debate around where these came from, but there were a couple of anonymous commentaries too that used Tychonius's work. So what you see then is most of the readings for 616 either started off in North Africa, were promulgated by the Donatists, and every other time you see later on in the future has a link back to Tychonius's work. So for me, it just seems very clear that the 616 reading was generated somewhere in North Africa. And when Irenaeus saw it, he just said, guys, this is not it. It's 666. Let's just keep it 666. And of course, Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, who wrote Revelation. So for me, it's pretty clear. It would take a lot more than, 2 manuscripts and one with an odd reading to convince me that it would be otherwise. So
yeah, but also really, it would throw off our cultural use of 666 so much if it ended up being 616. I mean, even people who don't know the Bible know that 666 is a bad number.
I know.
It could be hilarious though. Someone's like puts 666 and says something, and no, it's actually 616. Right. You should be careful of.
You'll have all these heavy metal bands who aren't as bad as they think they are. That's not good. No.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but yeah, I was surprised to see Dan Wallace worked up a little bit over that. I think he said there were some nights where he would go to sleep thinking, and this is in a video somewhere, where he wasn't sure whether it was 616 or 666. I think that it's pretty clear, but again, not to throw shade on Dan Wallace. He's doing some good work with the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, but. I think he missed it on this one.
Well, speaking of him, Bible Verse Review was able to finish their thought.
Oh, there it is.
And Dan Wallace said in regards to variations, it's like putting a 10,000 piece puzzle together, or getting a 10,000 piece puzzle. But when you receive it, it actually has 10 extra pieces. That's better than receiving it with only 990 pieces of the puzzle. Yeah,
it's true enough. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. At the very least, in the variants, we have the entire Word of God for sure. Again, I would argue.
So Red chimes in here. Imagine your hotel room is number 666. Well, now you got to be scared of 666, and if it's Dan Wallace, he's scared if it's 616. Right?
616. That's right.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
By the way, Dan Wallace, great. Academic scholar, and really defends from everything I've seen, really defends the Bible, defends the New Testament. But yes. One comment I want to make about scholars is they're human. They're people. They have their own perspectives and their influence, just like all of us. I think a lot of you out there, if you're honest, there are days when maybe you're watching the news and certain things are being told to you, and you're like starting to look at things a certain way just because that's where your mind is at, and that's the input your brain is getting. And on other days, you have a different perspective depending on your mood and what you've been watching and other
That's
factors.
right.
And I think, that's unfortunately that's just part of being a human, right? And
Hmm.
the truth is, academic people aren't infallible, and they know that. They would say that,
Yeah,
but
that's right.
they sometimes, just like all of us, they sometimes start to second guess things depending on what information they're looking at. Let me say this, though, kind of in his defense.
Yes.
Sometimes academics are the best at seeing things before everybody else.
Yes.
Because just because you're seeing something different doesn't mean you're wrong.
Hmm.
And I'm not so much talking about the mark of the beast, but I am saying
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of things that academics were the first to discover it, and everybody else was like, no, that's not what we're used to hearing, and
Hmm.
and then lo and behold, it gets back to our textual criticism. There may have been an overcorrection in the 1800s, and there was too much rationalism, believing in human intellect
Yes.
over
Yeah.
understanding God's superintendence of his word. But that didn't mean any type of questioning was wrong. That you
Right.
can't discover more by looking at more evidence. I mean, Erasmus was looking at the evidence he had,
That's
right?
right.
So what's
Yep.
wrong in the
Yep.
King James? Let's talk about the King James. The
Sure.
King James translators put footnotes in the Bible
Yes, it did.
that, occasionally, not often, but occasionally they would say certain manuscripts say such and such. And
Mm.
this is a really interesting thing. We all know about the italicized words, but
Yeah.
there's a verse in First John where like half the verse is
Oh,
italicized.
yeah. Five.
And
Yeah.
that's not because they just made that up. That's because the manuscript was in question. And so that's how they dealt with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the interesting thing, like the TR tradition itself, right? So we often hear of the TR as a handful of printed editions, but in reality, there's a very large number of TR printed editions. Um, I I would like to think that it's probably more than 30 at the very least. And we often think of like Stephanus and Beza and Elzevir and Scrivener and name a couple others, but there are a significant amount more. And so in one of my videos, I did a review. So I have this whole playlist where I took the majority text, sorry, the Byzantine text, and compared it with the Textus Receptus. And I went through the book of Matthew. I'm going to be going through Mark shortly. But I found a variant in there that was a variant inside of the TR tradition. So it was a very small variant. I think the distinction was Jesus being set on the donkey, so as in the disciples came and set Jesus on the donkey, versus Jesus sitting on the donkey. That's the variant. Admittedly, it's small, right? Like this isn't going to impact anything, like nothing. It's the same. It's not a big deal. But it is a difference in wording, and
Mm,
I think there's a difference in tense, whether one was plural or one was singular.
mm,
So even in the TR tradition, you do have to make decisions on what you're going to finally put into the final edition of the Textus Receptus, and that's what Scrivener did. And of course, he used the King James version in order to help him determine which of those readings were
he
being
he
used.
reverse
But
engineered
yes, reverse
the
engineered. That's right. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
He's got a video on
Um,
that. Just
yeah,
wanted to let my audience know Dwayne has a video on that
yes.
where you clarify that and
That's right.
explain
He
your
didn't back
thinking.
translate it. He didn't back translate. He reverse engineered. There is a distinction there. There's a very important distinction there. So go watch that. You'll
Mm.
know what I mean. But yeah. So yeah. Even Erasmus had to do textual criticism, and even Scrivener had to do textual criticism. Now their methods are different, certainly, but I mean that's part of the history of the church. We've gone through manuscript differences since the inception of the church and the writing of the New Testament. So.
Mm, it's good. Well, I really appreciate this conversation, and I don't see Bible verse review on with me yet. He's going to come on real soon and be in the backstage. So, Nicholas, anytime you're ready, you can come on. I'm going to be transitioning to the next hour, and I'm gonna put my break sign up here while we do this transition. And I see Nicholas actually coming on in the back room, so I'm gonna put my break sign on for a few minutes, and then I will start hour 3 in just a few minutes after we take a little break. It won't be a commercial break, but it'll be kind of like that, and we'll be back in a few minutes. But I want to thank Dwayne so much for being part of this celebration, and I really do enjoy talking to you, Dwayne. You're just a pleasure to interact with. Always enjoyed our conversations, and we've had a lot of different topics we've talked about.
That's right. Yep. We have.
Even your astrophotography.
That's right. I actually, you know what? I haven't had a chance to get the telescope out much because all the forest fires, they totally mess everything up. So we've had a lot of smoke and all that. So it's a bit disappointing, but that's just what it is. Other people have greater issues with the forest fires than I do trying to take pictures of the sky. So just remember those guys. It's getting pretty bad.
Yes, we've even seen the smoke down here quite a bit from Canada. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for inviting me on, Tim. This was great. Again, congratulations, 20,000 subscribers. May you get 20,000 more.
Aw, thank you so much. And may you get 20,000.
That's right.
And do a special event for yours. That'd be great.
Well, I was just thinking, I just recently passed 2,000, and so being on your 20,000 one, I'm thinking like Dwayne has slain his thousands, but Tim has slain his tens of thousands.
That's okay, because there are people out there that are doing hundreds of thousands, right? There's always a bigger fish.
Right. All right. Well, awesome job, Tim. Enjoy the time. Enjoy your channel. All right. Take care.
Goodbye.